60.
Yeah,
I'm using a Nexi Go.
Yeah, Elgato's not bad.
I'm gonna buy this
Elgato
Elgato right
Zymox.
now.
Don't just use your iPhone as a camera.
I don't.
Yeah,
You think I
apparently
have
that
an
works.
iPhone? I've run Pixel. I'm an Android.
Someone has
You're an Android? Oh my
Yeah.
god, I can't.
It's probably
believe
the
you.
it's probably the
like
audience.
The green, the
Yeah.
green dot. I'm sorry. Like I just go for the Pixels every time. Just the Pixel A series. I don't care. As long as I
Yeah.
can read the news and see stuff and get phone calls.
Like I said, I got tired of Google trying to sell me shit that I was talking
Yeah.
about the night before.
That's
with
why
my
actually
wife.
I would buy an Android phone if it wasn't for the fact that I personally believe that Google just wants to mine all of my data, and so that's my only.
Yeah, it's because they are.
Yeah,
Right.
Apple uses planned obsolescence to sell you the same iPhone.
They just
every
want to
year.
sell me more
Google
Which
sells
sucks.
your data to someone else.
You gotta pick your crap, right?
Yeah.
Like you've just got to pick your crap, and
Yes.
I'd rather have planned obsolescence than like I said, like the level that Google is actually looking in on what I'm doing is just it made me uncomfortable. I was kind of done with it, so yeah.
Fair.
I know there's people like, but Apple. I know.
Now
Apple
I have to
sucks.
go buy.
Pick
an
your
Apple phone.
poison. Yeah, it's pick your
Yeah.
poison. That's what it is. That's where we live in. Pick your data broker. Would you rather have it be local or remote?
I do wish that the Microsoft phone was still a thing. It would be nice to have at least that option.
Bring back the Zune.
It is. What you do, John, is you
Zune.
get an
Zune phone.
Android, or sorry, you just get any like ARM tablet, and then you just put Windows 10 on it, and then you just use like
No, you
virtual
buy
machines.
You buy an old phone, just put a bullet through it, and it's about as functional as that Microsoft
Yeah,
phone.
there you go.
Okay, that's just mean.
Are we ready to kick this thing off proper? Or is this all going to be a pre-show show?
It's a show.
Oh,
about
no.
pre-show.
Launch it. Launch the fire.
Let's do it.
Fire the finger.
All right.
Fire the rockets.
Ryan's here.
Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Black Hills Information Security Talking About News. And as Roger just pointed out, the only InfoSec news podcast that gives you the finger right at the beginning. This week, we're going to be talking about the MOVEit vulnerability because literally that is probably the single most important thing that is on the news today. But we have other news stories that maybe we're going to get into, like how long John Strand underwear model Insurrection was sentenced to prison, which I'm sure is interesting. Who the hell put this here? Whose picture is that? Whose picture is that? I can see who did this.
No,
I can tell you
no.
it was me.
That just means,
It was me.
That just means Wade's hovering over it. Don't
Yeah.
let him.
Oh,
don't
no,
shoot
don't
the
hover over
messenger. That's Wade though. But no. So this is actually the real question is who wrote the news article. But all we know is that John Strand, international. I don't know how you can be a national underwear
guess
model,
we're
but he's an
sharing it now.
international underwear
International-
model.
Local
He was
regional
sentenced to 32 months in prison, which
32 months.
he cannot do the math to turn that into
Do you
years.
think
so
he's going
that's
to be
why
an underwear model in prison too?
Oh, dude.
Listen. They
Listen.
yeah.
Yeah.
I honestly like wonder how are these people being treated in prison? We know certain people are treated really badly in prison based on their crimes. Like, do you think secessionists are like? Is that good or is that bad?
I think it depends on the prison you go to. Like, Martha Stewart's prison sounded pretty awesome. What's that lady from Thanos? Was it Thanos or Thanaros?
Theranos, the Elizabeth
Theranos,
Holmes.
yeah. The Steve Jobs looking lady that wore the turtleneck and everything. She's going to prison sounds actually kind of nice, actually. Seriously, if someone were to come up to me and like, John, we're going to take you to prison and there's going to be sporting activities, cooking classes, and arts and crafts and exercise hour, like, and there's no real perimeter and there's no fence and there's no armed guards, like, sign me up.
Sounds like the Hotel California.
However, the
Check
web
in
proxy.
anytime I like. Very good, Ryan.
So the web proxy's not very good.
Yeah, the web proxies aren't that good. I could do without it. They're like, here, you've got to surrender your computers and your phones. I'm like, here, just take it.
Only have to
Done.
bypass this Palo Alto. You're good.
Yeah. Oh, jeez, that's all I've got to do to get out.
So we know that prisons use slave labor, but do they do it for pen testing yet? Like, is it like, oh man, I'm in like the bougie prison, so I have to write code for DoD now.
Oh, Roger's asking how many hacks gets him in. We need to create this prison. We need to create this prison, and we need to partner with them. This is evil. We're like a corporation trying to figure out how to profit up the United States. It's really fantastic, everybody, that's not the way the actual prison system works in America, right?
That's
Right?
Imagine,
That's right.
Imagine just an elite group of hackers coming straight out of prison, right? Though, like, because they stopped giving them weights because they're all buff, but now they're just coming out just nation
Ready
state
to go.
ready
Yeah.
to just your next ransomware group. Here we come.
See, that's what you think it is, but what you're only going to get is a bunch of Kevin Mitnicks.
They're all influencers. You're like, come on, guys, stop tweeting about how cool prison is. It's like,
Yeah,
keep
it's
it
not
exciting.
that cool. It's not as cool as you think it is. God, there's so many stories, but we've got to get
Let's
to the
talk,
big
let's
one,
talk about
folks.
MOVEit.
Let's talk about MOVEit. I'm going to set the stage a little bit, talking about it. So one of the things that I've got a bunch of things that I want to talk about, and I'll just kind of circle back through them.
I think I need
so
the link for this one.
Yeah, here I'm going to give
Probably
you
don't.
the
Everyone already
actual.
has the
You
article.
got it. Somebody
Don't
can get
click
that
on
link.
the YouTube music video.
Don't click on this.
It's not that good. It's not that good.
So one of the pros of this is progress.com, the people that create MOVEit. This particular vulnerability is by far and away the most viewed page on their website. So congratulations,
Wow,
Progress.
They did it.
Somebody in marketing did a good job there.
So for
but
anyone
there's-
wondering what they do, this is like managed file transfer.
It is.
It's like Kiteworks or one of those similar, like,
Kind
you
of.
know, they have an
Box.
SFTP component. They have a web component.
web front end. Yeah, it's all slick.
I just
But apparently there's an unauthenticated SQL injection vulnerability. And what it allows you to do is drop a web shell on the system. And that's just one of the things that it does. And it's, like I said, the web vulnerability allows you to then get access to the system itself, the entire file system on the computer system. And the thing that's driving me absolutely up a wall, and I want to start with this question. If this was 7-8 years ago, there would be exploits and proof of concept exploit code everywhere, like all over the internet. What I'm seeing now is a bunch of indicators of compromise. There's a ton of things, and I can't remember where I saw. Here I got some Yara rules.
There's Python tools to
There's
scan
no
if you have a
fear.
web shell.
It like dropped like a Windows log file or something like that.
It does.
Right?
Well,
Like,
it dropped a
yeah.
whole bunch of DLLs and all kinds of different things. But here's
Well,
my
when
problem.
you say it, you're talking about a very specific malware.
Yes,
And,
yes.
and
I
it's
should
just
make
because
that.
there's a SQL injection doesn't
Yeah,
mean
so-
yeah.
So everybody's kind of focused on Lace Tempest is the group that we believe started using this exploit the 27th of this month, or last month. It was the first time that I know of so far. So we're on the 5th. And for the record, as of right now, there are 2,517 systems online that are MOVEit servers. I'll share that with everybody. That's actually a Shodan search that you can run, that you're allowed to find it via the fave icon
Ooh, the
patch
fave.
associated with it. So that's kind of cool.
You could patch your server by changing the fave account.
You totally could. Totally could. So here's the problem I have with the Yara rules for this so far. And I really want to get Wade's take on this. And I would love to get Mike's take on this as well first out of the gate, because, you know, they're more blue. A lot of these are the hashes, right? Here's the file hashes that you need to be looking for. And there's like 1, 2, 3, 4 of the file hashes in the Yara rule that I'm looking at. I find it interesting that there are Yara rules and detection rules for the Lace Tempest exploitation of this vulnerability way before there was proof of concept code associated with this. While they're doing that, Ryan, I'll share my screen because I have a Shodan license because I'm fancy like that. Is this progress, or is this like moving in the wrong direction? I'm kind of conflicted. I'm going to share my screen out so people can look at the stuff that I just talked about while they're talking.
I've talked about before, like Yara's great and all, but my experience is not a lot of people are using it nowadays. And once again, sticking with the hashes, you don't want to stay with those atomic indicators at all. I right off the bat was looking for
There we go.
I was looking for any Sigma based
timing.
rules. I was looking for Sigma rules for it and found a couple right off the bat, and then just hovering over Twitter pretty much the whole time looking for stuff. But hashes are always. I hate it when anyone just gives you a hash and just like detect things. I'm like, no, like.
So
Part of the
what most
problem
Make me
companies-
sad blue teamer.
Part
companies
of
are
the
doing-
problem. Part
go
of the
ahead,
problem
Mike.
that we have with using hashes like that is most of the time, by the time those come out, if you're writing your own way of detecting it using those hashes, that's going to be tossed into just about every EDR within moments, within an hour, I would say, of Yara rules coming out. So if you're using CrowdStrike or you're using SentinelOne or you're using Microsoft, you're going to have those hashes automatically put in as it is anyways. The TTPs, the way that they're going about doing it is well more effective as far as the detection rate goes for a experienced blue teamer, somebody that's actually going to write their own detections on it and not just sit there and be vulnerable just because they've got hashes and say, oh, I got the first hashes and that's it, we're done.
Okay.
And like we've talked to a couple companies, clients that have it, and it's not. There's a patch for it, and it's usually this isn't like business critical. What people are doing, it seems, is just taking it offline, patching it, and then bringing it back. So I don't think that in this case you need to, like, Yara or something advanced like that is great when you're talking about like the scope can be huge, the impact is huge, and you can't take it offline. But like with this, you're just like, do we have MOVEit? Yeah, we do. Okay, turn that off and let's patch it, and then let's turn it back on. Like, I don't think it just seems superfluous. But this is the standard, though. This is how you handle incidents like this, and at least that I found, I can't find proof of concept code, like what the actual parameters are vulnerable. Is it, what? I haven't found that yet. So it's essentially like the defenses are there. There's already a patch. Hashing and doing all this fancy R stuff is probably not worth the time. By the time you get the rules dropped in, you should have just patched it by then. So
I'm just burned out. Like there's been bigger stuff, right?
Yeah.
Log4j kind of already, like that's the first thing I'm thinking of that's in recent history that I would care more about than this. I also like honestly, I dived into it when it first came out and then realized like, oh, no one I know, none of the corporate people I work with, or like I don't have it, or a lot of other people don't have it. It's a lot smaller of a footprint, so
yeah.
I think it's there.
But let's talk about that footprint just for a second. That footprint, it may be small in the number of systems. Like I said, if you go on Shodan, it's something like 2,500 systems are running it now. The vast majority of them are in the United States. And I'm going to share my screen again because I was going to bring
They
that
also
up.
have a software as a service offering.
And Gossi the dog had credible information that the SaaS offering was vulnerable as well. So here you've got the number of systems, and the vast majority are in the United States because it's a really expensive product, apparently. And apparently it's heavily used by the United States government, which is probably part of the reason that we have Lace Tempest or advanced APT groups actually going after it. And some people have called out in the comments so far that it's not quite as simple as just bringing down the file transfer service and then bringing it back up, patching it and bringing it back up, because there are actual organizations that are heavily using file transfers. In particular, one of the customers that we have talked to, Ben from KC, I think brought that point up, was a law firm. And I think that this also gets into some really interesting questions about, it's one thing to say, here's what you need to do to patch it. I agree with the Yara, like the utility of Yara rules are less interesting to me at the moment than the detection of the attack. And more importantly, like, is anybody know what the logging of this is to be able to tell if you've been attacked? Because a lot of the detection that I've been reading online is really, really light, right? Like they're like, here's additional best practices and here's some IOCs. And the IOCs are absolutely like the generic Yara hash IOCs. What kind of logs does MOVEit generate? Can we actually look at those logs to see what if an exploit actually happened? And I know I can answer this question, but I want to kick it out
down a little bit further. There you go.
kind of talk about this a little bit. This is the Trusted Sec blog, which I think is the best blog.
Yeah,
for
that's what
this
I was
one.
using for.
So this is a write-up of the web shell that the threat actors were using.
Yes.
But yeah,
And that's once again, this is more useful. This is more in line with what Wade and Mike were talking about. And I'm not as interested in the actual hashes. I'm really interested in the tradecraft that was used for this, because
Yeah.
odds are the attackers and the pen testers will be following the same pathways.
So yeah, the other thing to keep in mind is like one of the recommendations, what obviously to apply the patch, but the other recommendation is just to completely remove the web interface or disable the web interface, and that would leave the SFTP, which, to be honest, I would guess for like a law firm, the web interface is just as critical because you have, distribution of documents and things like that, and that's all very important using primarily the web interface. For probably financial industry, it's more using of the actual SFTP. Just sending statements and financial stuff back and forth. Like that's, they used to drive a truck with a bag of checks. Now they do this. Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that it's one of those, honestly though, having done a lot of pen tests for organizations, the file transfer applications are one of my favorite targets because they usually don't have single factor, they usually do have single factor. They don't have multi-factor. And they usually don't have good account management practices, and I can almost always find credentials and data breaches for these types of file transfers because they have really widespread usage. Where like if you work for any other company and I have to send you a file, I have to use this appliance. So that means there's hundreds of thousands of accounts of people that have used it once, and most companies don't expire the accounts. So it's like you have this huge list of accounts that are permanently enabled with bad credentials. It leads to, I guess, honestly, more than anything, we use it as a phishing vector, not necessarily to access sensitive data, but we use it to send internal spear phishes a lot. So you might get an account. Yeah, they have no access to sensitive files, but I can go in this file transfer application and send an email to our point of contact or, another target, and it'll have an attachment or whatever, and it will come from a trusted sender. So it won't be like external email. It'll be like this person shared this file with you.
Which is an excellent pivot.
But this gets into a conversation that I'd like to kind of rehash that we had today at the BHIS meeting, where we have had customers that we found single factor authentication, right? We weren't able to exploit it because there wasn't a 0-day or, we didn't have credentials in, breach databases or anything like that. And we have decided that is going to be a high vulnerability moving on. Not necessarily because of this 0-day, but because of other vulnerabilities. And at any point, you're one breached credential away from being completely compromised. And that's too close for my comfort. So kind of opening that up, I mean, even in BHIS, we had different opinions. What do you all think about that? Just like, hey, if this is single factor, not that two-factor would have stopped this, but just basically bringing up these types of portals and saying, look, these things should not be exposed. And if they are exposed, it should be two-factor. Was talking. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to say, I have two things on this that I'll just hit. So the first one is that not every time can you immediately deduce whether this interface is single
two-factor or not.
Yes, exactly. Right. So sometimes it'll ask for that authentication method later, and it's an option that you can enable or disable. Right. So you may be able to like, this product does support two-factor. I'm not sure if it's enabled. Right. So as far as like letting the customer know, that's when you're going to be like, hey, I'm not sure. Is it two-factor? Asking the customer, or two, writing it up and then, being like, oh, well, we weren't sure. We weren't able to determine, but we wanted to make sure. Right. So that's kind of my take at like how to approach that single factor, right? Because there's times where you just don't know. There's not a way without a valid credential to confirm whether there's two-factor. Other times it's easy to tell. So
just it has to be a dialogue.
It's tagging on to Corey's talk, right? Like all these things are one-time use, but the biggest part for the blue teamers is you're fighting against the corporate culture, right? And usually when people are using these type of stuff, it's the business people, and those are the people who are making the money and who can scream the loudest. Yep. And so you really have to fight for that. The stuff that I've seen put in place is that it all has a time to live. Like that's pretty much the account is going to die or get deleted even after use, and everything that you sent with that dies right off the bat.
Yes, and that's how it should be. So
that's important. Timing out of the files that you transfer. That's a great point.
And the other thing,
the other problem with multi-factor, at least in the financial industries that I've seen that use FTP, SFTP, is a lot of it is just straight automated. So the transfers are done in batch, at XYZ time, and nobody's actually physically touching that login on it. So I'm not sure. I haven't delved into a lot of the FTP stuff at this point, but I'm not sure if you could even automate the answer of a multi-factor authentication on it, whereas a time to live would help create the situation a little bit better.
Because it's reducing the total blast radius of the attack, right?
I mean,
like
yeah.
you gain access to a server and you've gotten access to the files in the last hour or two. That sucks. There's no question, right? But if you gain access to the server and every single file that's ever been transferred for the past 5-10 years, that's catastrophic at that point.
Yeah, and that's the other thing I was going to say is like we talk about, this is an old school attack. You talked about, 7 or 8 years ago, this would have been, just another SQL injection. And even today, it's insane to see an application that's this recent that still has SQL injection. But I think the thing to think about with this is one advantage of this is that this is an application that you can put absolutely on its own network segment out in the void with no access to nothing, because it's all point to point of like user to user to user to user to user. When you get into the automation stuff, hopefully it's still point to point where it's like automated, automated system to automated system. So like if I shell this thing and I get access to whatever it has access to, you would hope most organizations set this up to be isolated on its own network segment or in the cloud by itself, because it doesn't need any access to it. But it is funny because it's a SQL injection. You can get system access, and then anything the system has access to network-wise, So it's an old school vulnerability that you just hope that as a community, as a security industry, we know we have this file transfer appliance. We're going to put it by itself in this network segment with access to nothing.
It's an old code, but it checks out.
Two stories of detection that I think are important just from the last week at BHIS. One of them is an IR engagement. So the customer, you talk about the best practices and reducing the blast radius. This particular customer only did the file transfers to specific IP addresses. Yeah. And they actually put in rules, I think within this application, MOVEit, you can say you're only allowed to receive connections from this IP address over here. And the way that they detected it is they noticed that it was literally sending data to places that were not on that approved IP address list. So then we got involved. We started looking at it. We're like, holy crap, it's literally like communicating to systems that it honestly should not be able to communicate with at all. And I love that as a story because, yes, the customer was one of the people that got hit, but let's be honest, how many companies out there would be able to detect something like that, right? Like they put in the rules, whether it's a firewall rule or a local app rule, to restrict it because that's good security practice, right? You're going to say, hey, we just got to do this with this IP address over here, lock it down. They do that, and then they're able to detect whenever something is outside of those conditions. And I think that when we're looking at computer security, a lot of people are missing that second step. They'll go through the various steps to try to lock it down with a firewall rule, lock it down with a local rule on the application itself, but they don't have any detective capabilities to say, hey, if anybody is making a connection to an IP address other than this one, then freak out. They're not putting in rules to validate their security support structure. So that was one customer. And the other one was a SOC customer of ours. As soon as this hit, because we're pulling sysmon logs from all of our different systems, because sysmon is the cat's pajamas, we're able to go through event ID 1 and identify the vulnerable versions of the SecureIt server, the MOVEit server, and we're able to say, are any of these hashes in our database, and able to identify going through and saying, all right, customer, you have this. It's absolutely vulnerable. I think the customer, we saw two, actually. I think we saw one that was making a connection to the domain for the SaaS service. And then the other one was a customer that was running it internally. But we were able to notify them ahead of time. But that of being exploited is like, literally, you need to fix this right now. And the thing that bothers me is like a lot of these general blogs talking about this, Trusted Sec aside, I think that theirs is really, really, really solid. People aren't having conversations about not just how you detect this thing, but how do you set up your architecture to detect things like this moving forward in the future?
So your first story, it hit a nerve for me because I feel like that's where the separation from security engineering and security operations really creates a hole in defense.
Yeah.
Like, especially with bigger organizations, usually the people who are setting up the tools aren't necessarily the people who are running them later or building those detections for them later. And like going from large corporations and small corporations, I will say usually the smaller corporations have more fine-tuned stuff because it's the same person doing everything. At least like in a more healthy environment. Whereas as myself, someone who ran and deployed the tools and then also built the detections, I knew the tools back to front. But it's a little bit harder to get that level of communication with a security engineering team to build that stuff. I didn't even know about that other part, John, that you could put in that whitelisting, the listing part, or in the back end. Which
I don't know if they put it in as a firewall rule in the SFTP service and the web server was exposed to everybody. But look, if I'm dealing with a customer, and this is one of those things people talk about insurance companies, and they're like, if we get hacked, is the insurance company going to pay out? You'll want to be at that tier, right? Where you put in the security controls, you had validation for the security controls. Sure, you got popped, but it's going to be damn hard, totally not impossible, but damn hard for the insurance company in that situation to say, we're not going to pay out because, you had weak security. I mean, you're putting in filtering and you're putting in detections to see if anything exists outside of that condition. You're already 2 steps removed from 90% of the companies that are out there for security.
It's a really good way to pitch it too, is you're eliminating risk and for the company in order for them to use that insurance and tying back your security controls to stuff like that.
I have 3 little things I just want to say about the MOVEit vulnerability. One is that showdown list that you sent, John, that includes a secure at mobile, which I guess wasn't vulnerable to this. So like that hash, right, for the favorite icon includes like the mobile sites as well, because those are web interfaces. So it might not be an exact representation of all of the MOVEit transfers, right? And this was a web interface in front of the ability to do SFTP transfers, among other ones in the back. But the thing that I thought was the funniest is if you look up what MOVEit transfer says about their system, is that it is PCI, HIPAA, GDPR, SOC 2, Type 2, all of these. It is so compliant. It is the most compliant application in the world, right? For doing these kinds of transfers, right? But, back to your detection and just like, defense in depth. I think someone brought that up, right? How to lock this down is, most likely deciding, does it need to be public, right? Does anyone on the internet need to be able to access this web interface to do some kind of file transfer, and making that decision first? So
I will tell you, yesterday, John Hammond was able to get, he has a proof of concept Python script that exploits the SQL injection vulnerability. And so there are people that are able to reverse engineer this and have already reverse engineered the vulnerability. So I'm not ripping on John or anybody at Huntress. They're freaking awesome. But I'm willing just to throw this out there. If John Hammond and Huntress were able to get this going, there's a whole bunch of other threat actors that are reverse engineering this and getting the exploit functional. And he has a full video if you want to see that as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I can't believe I'm about to say this, but I feel like, okay, honestly, how can you have a PCI compliant website if you don't have parameterized SQL queries? Like, shouldn't that be on the checkbox list? Like, for real. Like, I know PCI compliance is a lie. I know I know how they work. I've done it. I get it. However, should there be some stupid checkbox I can put on my website that says we passed a basic web app audit? Or because truthfully, in 2023, non-parameterized SQL queries, meaning I can go from injection to shell in X number of steps.
The entire exploit in the video, and it could be sped up, is like 1 second.
So
it's a simple Python script. Yeah.
Shouldn't this be part of compliance? Is we use modern security practices to build our apps? No? Okay. I'll move on.
But I don't know. I can send you over a fainting couch and a box full of pearls for you to clutch. Are you honestly that surprised by vendors? I mean, yeah, I'm sure that they have a security test. Yeah, I'm sure that they might use parameterized SQL statements in most of the app. But once again, it just takes one simple mistake for something like this to go through.
I'm just saying, there's developers that were born after I learned you shouldn't do this.
Okay. Screw you.
What? It just takes one intern, all right?
There we go. You're right. It does just take one intern or one slip up in the code.
Yeah.
But here's my question, and this is something that's absolutely shocking to me, is once again, if I was 8 years ago, there were many times the offensive community would have released the proof of concept code before the patch was released. This happened many, many, many times. Is this progress in the industry as a whole? Like we're sharing DTEX, we're sharing YAR rules, good, bad, or not. We're sharing blue team stuff before the red team stuff hits. Is this progress, or is it just an indication that red teamers everywhere are probably lazy? Because I can guarantee you if BHIS was in the middle of a test and this was something that was there, like we would have crowdsourced and had an exploit. And there's got to be other red teaming companies that have the exploit already built. I can make some calls real quick and find out. But seriously, does this mean that red teamers are lazy, or is this a good sign in the industry that maybe people are holding back and keeping their powder dry?
I don't think it's a good sign. I think it's the holding back part, because as a blue teamer, I want both, right? Like I want to write that detection and then I want to go test it. I want to make sure that it's properly working. That's me to a T. I like to trust myself, but I would trust and verify and then, we're cool. Like,
exactly.
If you don't have both, it's no good.
And also, John, it was exploited by real attackers in the wild, and X number of data was stolen. So,
and this is
security fail.
Yeah. So this is my take on it, and it's kind of springboarding off of what Wade said and kind of reinforcing that. If we have an exploit, how many times have we seen patches come out from a vendor and the patch is specifically detecting a iteration of a SQL injection attack?
Yeah.
And if you modify it, like, the lace tempest were using apostrophe or 1 = 1 semicolon dash dash, and they put in a string in their detection inside of the app that says, if somebody comes in with apostrophe or 1 = 1 semicolon dash dash, you're going to drop that connection. And then you're like, well, what if it's 2 = 2? Damn it. We didn't write it for that. They don't fix the vulnerability. And I think that having that transparency and having that exploit code available in a lot of ways keeps that vendor really
correct.
honest.
It's also motivation to patch, by the way. When the exploit's public, it's motivation to patch. So I would say
Josh Wright's
100%.
law. Yeah. Josh Wright's law says people will not patch unless there is an exploit in the wild.
Like I told you,
exactly.
you always just say, we just need BHIS just publishing, hey, we're exploiting that. Hey,
there is a guy and I gotta say, there is a guy that had, I'm sure there's or a guy or girl, security guy that was like, we got to put a WAF in front of our managed file transfer. And everyone was like, this is stupid. You don't put things in front of things. And he was like, no, we're putting a WAF in front of it. We put a WAF in front of everything. And they did not get hacked.
Yeah.
Just
I like Roger's quote, assume it's out there.
Yeah.
Right? The exploit is out there. I got to send that in for a t-shirt thing for Wild West Hacking Fest.
Oh, it's malware finds a way. We already have it. But I mean,
but the X-Files theme. The exploit is out there.
Corey said that this is I can't believe this SQL, right? There's SQL injection, but there's probably more because this is a class of
God.
I hate to be like the guy who's like, if it could happen one time, that means that they weren't doing check. I mean, I've done plenty of web apps where I found it once and I was just like, it's going to be everywhere.
Are you using the LastPass defense?
Yes.
Are you saying just where there's smoke, there's fire, and everyone bail like screws?
I'm not saying everyone bail. I'm just saying that to your point about the class of vulnerability, if you're not checking for it, right? And this was able to get through.
This is a rewrite. Yeah, this is a rewrite level vulnerability. Yeah. Yes.
So let's get on that. Like, we don't know what the SQL injection is. If this is a SQL injection in a get parameter, i.e. up in the URL, and it can be found quickly and easily with Burp Suite Pro.
It is unauthenticated. I can tell you that much.
It is unauthenticated. So that means that your get and post, like the number of variable fields that you have to play with are incredibly limited.
It's pretty bad.
Yeah.
It's egg on face.
But then it's getting into, does MOVEit actually have a letter of attestation anywhere on their website? Like if I go to website, got community corner.
Well, that's another question. Who knows?
Letter of attestation.
Or
ask
an
ChatGPT.
Yeah, it doesn't know anything past 2021, so it's not going to be great for that.
They've got nothing.
I'm sure I have to get like a super subscriber account to download the new version to see what the change was, but
and I'm willing to bet also that that's what reverse
exactly. That's how you're going to get it.
Yeah. Just do a patch diff on it. Yeah. And that brings up yet another question is if you look at how Microsoft releases patches, they obfuscate the living hell out of the patches. So you can't go directly. It's like, here's the line in this dynamic link library that's different from this before. That's where you need to write your exploit, boys and girls. They do all kinds of things to obfuscate the DLL for one version to another. Is MOVEit actually doing those type of obfuscation techniques, or can you literally just do a patch diff and say, here's what they changed? And
I mean, if they missed SQL, I don't know if they're taking it that far.
That's the question.
That's pretty bad. It's like I said, there are developers that were born after this was a bad idea that are probably actively writing this code.
I'm going to give them not new. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt because, like somebody said, it just takes one intern. Just takes one person.
There was an if statement and someone did it. Yeah,
I get that, but Microsoft
had the security. It was just bypassed for some.
Yeah.
You just.
So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt, mainly because I know at some point in my future, someone's going to be like, "How come BHIS didn't find this, or active countermeasures didn't find this?" And I'm like, "Well, God, it was just God damn it, it was just one mistake. You missed one vulnerability.
It was one mistake in something it's one mistake in something that's obviously not highly widely used. So how often are you going to actually run into
that? Is a good point. Only 2,500 exposed ones on the internet.
And probably actually lower than that. Because like Ralph said that.
When I'm doing like a red team or something like that, and I see a developed application that's like maintained, I'm going to spend less time on that than I might on a custom application. Not to say that I won't check for those things, or if you paid me to do a test on this app, I'll just spend all the time doing it. But if I'm looking wide, I'm not going to spend as much time on that particular app because I assume,
that brings up two separate things whenever it comes to red teaming. Number one, when you're doing red teaming, if we're at the point where we're trying to write a 0 day in 2 weeks against a COTS software package, we're pretty desperate. Now, Bradley had that one, I can't remember the name of the software, where we reverse engineered the Nessus plugin. So the exploit wasn't public, but he was doing packet capture to capture the vuln scan data and then was able to reverse engineer that and get it an exploit. Now that's the type of cheating that we do as red teamers. But this also, this is like once again, Vinny, talking about, he's kind of been ripping on, the idea of an assumed compromise assessment. He's just like, well, if it's an assumed compromise assessment, why don't we just give you access directly to our most secure data? Honestly, when you're looking at a red team like this, when we do an assumed compromise assessment, we're assuming that something like this is going to land. And then we're going through and testing your detective capabilities post exploitation. That's why it's so important. You absolutely should do red teams that are purely unauthenticated on the outside. But goddamn, if you look at it and you're like, well, if I give a red teamer access to my network, it's cheating. Abso-freaking-lutely. You need to do that type of test to say, if somebody sits in our DMZ, are we able to detect if there's outbound connections coming from one of our servers in the DMZ that's not a normal connection? Can we detect if somebody's pivoting from the DMZ to the internal network? Can we detect if somebody's pivoting from a SaaS platform that we're using into the internal network or into other parts of our infrastructure? That's why these types of tests exist. You can't expect your red team to come up with 0 days every single time, number one, because that's dumb and it's really, really expensive. And number two, they're totally not going to hit the same 0 days that other attackers are going to go after as well.
I mean, also the point of, if we're doing a red team and we're hitting this thing up, do you have the logging? What data did we get access
to?
So, and not to toot our own horn or our clients' horns too much, but we do have a lot of clients at Black Hills that hire us to do testing of commercial products like this. And on some level, you could say it's stupid because they didn't code it. And if there's an issue with it, they're just going to have to kick it back to the vendor. But this is a great example of, if you are one of those paranoid companies that hires pen testing firms to test your commercial applications in depth, like web apps, assumed compromise, full on, not just like, oh, we saw it on a red team, didn't look like a juicy target, but like, here's the MOVEit application, here's credentials for it, see if you can do anything bad. That validates the value of this, because there's always, I'm not saying we definitely would have found it, but there's the potential we find it. So it's, the people that are really paranoid are, this is edifying for them, where they're
and
like,
a consumer breach is like a total positive win for the blue team. A lot of times, like, it looks really good for us, where you have to actually move to assume breach. If you caught them trying to get in right off the bat, like, it's always a good ego boost, to tell you the truth, right?
There's nothing wrong with that, right? It's not meant to be adversarial at all. But I want to springboard on what Corey was just talking about. As the owner of Black Hills Information Security, the only companies that I know that actually hire red teaming companies to go in and do assessments of the products that they're using would be like financial investment firms. I think we have one insurance company in like over 12, 13 years, and then a couple of large scale manufacturing companies. And my point with that is these are companies that have monster security budgets. Their a level of risk tolerance is almost non-existent. It's not something that a normal company can be like, you know what? I'm paranoid of every single application that we have facing the internet. We should have that tested. And I think that comes back to, we've got to normalize vendors having letters of attestation from reputable pen testing firms saying that, yes, we have Bishop Fox that tested this application. We have Trusted Sec that tested this application. We have BHIS. We have Red Siege. We have Secure Ideas. Whatever.
HackerOne.
Hacker. I would trust HackerOne more than other bug bounty companies, right? Because a lot of bug bounty companies are just spray and pray. HackerOne, they'll actually do product assessments with third-party hired guns. But we need to normalize that, right? Because not every company can afford that. But these companies should be having that level of testing done on their products anyway and advertising it.
I would say yes, as long as it's not a product that involves a lot of custom configuration, which this is not. Like, this is just an off the shelf. If it's a product like, the classic example is what we test for every single client, which is their EDR configuration, right? Like, because we don't have a choice because it's running everywhere. So it's like, yeah, we're not going to find a bypass in your EDR, but we can find the exceptions or the exclusions or the, you just have it in alert only mode. Like, so yeah, I mean, I would agree with you, John, but I will say, like, for certain products that have like huge amounts of, setup and customization options, just
it doesn't matter at that point.
Yeah.
So you'd basically say like EDRs would be off the table for that type of testing.
I mean,
I'm joking.
They should definitely be publishing, like, here's how CrowdStrike isn't going to get hacked. But but at the end of the day, if you run it in alert only mode, it doesn't matter how much CrowdStrike doesn't get hacked, you will.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. And how many times do you see EDRs get quote unquote bypassed? And the EDRs are like, they disabled application allow listing. Like, they shouldn't have done that.
They
or
had
alerting non-blocking mode.
A lot of times, yes. And also, like, we had a rule because people needed to do their jobs, which their jobs involved running macro-enabled documents from the internet. So, yeah. But, like, that's not on the vendor. But anyway, we spent way too much time on that article. But interesting kind of, here's where we're at with security. Old is new, new is old. Nothing has changed. That defense in depth,
Do you guys want to talk about the Gigabyte one?
Yes, that's a good one.
Put your tinfoil hats on.
I thought it was Gigabyte.
Oh my god,
Giga?
No, it's Gigabyte. It's worse than Gigamon. It's Gigabyte.
Gigamon.
So, I just realized we burnt way too much on that previous story. This one's probably more important.
So Gigabyte had a firmware backdoor. Okay, so all right, so Gigabyte didn't actually have a backdoor per se, but it was easily exploitable. And the really high level for this is that the updater for this firmware didn't really validate who the server was. So and uses unencrypted. So you could do something like man in the middle, change the DNS request, and then suddenly you're updating the firmware on these devices, right? So that's kind of like the high level.
So basically, So basically, there's part of the firmware for these motherboards has tools that are built into them that are easily exploitable by attackers.
Yes.
And I will say, this reminds me, I don't know if you remember the Razer vulnerabilities. I don't even know if this got a lot of press, but it's as far as I know, still vulnerable. Where essentially when you plug in a Razer mouse, it just like does bad things, and you can totally hijack it. So,
As
like,
a gamer, I knew about it.
So okay, so here's which I'm pretty sure this is still vulnerable to my knowledge because it's a hardware thing. But I guess my take on this is I'm impressed that they even bothered updating this, because most home consumer gaming stuff is like this, where it's like, oh yeah, you plug in this USB, we download an exe from the internet, we run it as admin. That's pretty normal. So I'm actually impressed that they decided to update it and fix it. I give them credit for that, but also scary.
So first and foremost, Eclipsium is awesome. A good friend of ours, Paula Zadorian, is over there. So, hats off to them and what they're doing. But this also, like, if we go back to the threat model thing, this is totally something that, if our Russian friends would have discovered this, they absolutely would have used this, right? And this gets into the oopsies mistake, because if you're looking at like Gigabyte, they're not idiots, right? They're not like really bad developers, but they clearly made a boo-boo here. So.
Yeah. I mean, and I guess like this is kind of we could, I guess, if you want to spend a little more time on this article, one thing I guess we could discuss is, so what a lot of people might say, well, Gigabyte probably not getting a lot of usage in the enterprise area. It's probably mostly home gaming, right? Like, I don't think there's many large companies that are like, yeah, we're buying Gigabyte gaming desktops for all of our employees. So I guess like, but I did, to kind of lead the issue, I do want to say these gaming machines on people's home machines are part of the enterprise attack surface for many reasons we've talked about. LastPass is the biggest one I can talk about, where it's like
Plex server has a Gigabyte.
Yeah, I was going to say,
dude, I don't think it's PlexTrack. Don't bring them into
Oh,
this.
my Plex server. Oh, my bad. My Plex server. I was just working on Plex server.
Gigabyte does server motherboards as well.
Yeah, your home network,
enterprise ones.
Your home network is part of the threat model when you're in this work from home, zero trust type of world. So just something to think about. Yes, not
Yeah, Gigabyte actually has a pretty big enterprise motherboard division, and they actually have a lot of like GPU, AI boards, and other stuff like that. So, yeah.
Didn't this article say they knew how many were vulnerable?
Like 250 different ones. Yeah. They were just reusing the same code. I could be wrong on that number, but it's in the 200.
That's the number of motherboard models.
Oh, okay.
We don't know the total.
250, and I was like,
no, I don't think we know a total count. I mean, dude, that's enough models.
Yeah.
It's probably in the millions.
Yeah.
How to check what type of motherboard this computer has.
So can we talk about the Cyberweapons manufacturer? Because this is something we've talked about.
Yeah, this one's good.
Oh, that sounds good.
Ooh, Cyberweapon.
This is NSO Group and Pegasus and
This is a new one.
Paragon and all these companies that are selling
cool
cyber
names.
weapons. I think we've talked about this in the past where people are like, NSO is bad because they're being used by evil nation states and evil dictators. And once again, I want you all to think that through a little bit. Israel is awesome in what they're doing. Just let's give credit where credit's due. I know there's people like, I don't think Israel's awesome under anything. Back up. They're literally selling implant software to countries that want to kill them. That's awesome. Right? Now, whether or not you agree with Israel's policies or not is completely irrelevant. If you're a nation state and you could, like, if the United States could be like, hey, China and Russia, we've got this implant software over here. And they're like, oh, we'd totally like to buy that. What's the cost? $1 million. Here it is. Okay, here's the software. Now you're installing it in your most sensitive network segments. It's like, thanks. It's like that picture from The Office where he's winning an award and he looks confused. Like, that's brilliant. So I don't know. Like, I'm constantly surprised at people being surprised about nation state level weapons, cyber weapons. And should I stop being surprised at people not being surprised about this or being surprised?
I think it's
we're
just
getting into this weird surprise.
It's the
Fibonacci sequence.
It's the cyber like sexy factor that I always felt like.
Oh,
like
it is
there's
sexy.
there's other military contractors out there selling like actual weapons that kill people to like bad companies, right? Like, why do you care about the cyber more? But I think it's also because it could hit it feels like it hit you more because it's just cell phones. Everybody has a cell phone, right? And that's the way it's pitched, but I agree with you.
And I think you're right on the way it's pitched, right? Having been in some of those meetings, like if you have two people, you have one person that shows up to a meeting with a bunch of generals and they're like, here's a 0-day for this very specific version of Android phone. And it's 0-click and we can gain access. And then you can be in the back room. You're like, I can literally gain access to hundreds of accounts through breach database data. And they'll go for the 0-day click because it's shiny and it's sexy and it's cool and it's expensive. And that's literally where they're going to spend all their time.
I mean, I guess we should address the kind of depressing side of this, which is basically that this article and the company that's behind it, essentially what the article's saying is, if you have the right lawyers and politicians behind you, you can develop cyber weapons.
Their marketing strategy behind this was awesome. That's what this article is about. Is like, how do we only pitch to the U.S. so the U.S. doesn't?
Well, no, it's just how do you not step afoul of the U.S. so that they won't sanction you? It's just a really funny thing. It's like, okay, well, you can't tweet any pictures of Trump if you want it to be like. It's just so funny to be like, imagine being an Israeli person who's set up this company that has this amazing technology, and you're like, all right, cool. So we have the 0 days, we have this. I'm cool with it. I can sleep at night. And then you're like, all right, now we have to pick our customer list. Okay, let's call up the United States. Hey, who are we allowed to sell this to? Saudi Arabia? No. Russia? Yes or no? It's so silly. It's like, and as long as you don't go in the dark area and you stay out here in the light, you can sell it to the U.S. is fine with like, oh yeah, you can target Russia. That's fine. Just don't give it to Saudi Arabia. Like, it's just so silly.
But that's once again, that's probably not the conversation. They're basically like, I'm sure that here the bureaucracy thing was like, well, NSO Group sells to these countries and our export controls do not allow it. And there's probably some policy wonk out at the big blue building in Chantilly or, at the NSA headquarters or wherever. And they're like, oh, no, we can't go with that because they're violating export controls and blah, 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 blah. And then finally someone's like, but if we have a data sharing agreement with them on the ass end through SIGINT, we can get access to that data that they have selling it to these customers. And then I'm sure that there was a whole bunch of meetings where everyone got completely worked up and there was arguments back and forth. And some general finally made the decision that they're going to get this data. And when you're talking about the marketing of it, right? Every time NSO Group is in the news and they're saying, oh my God, they have this 0-click iOS vulnerability, there's Android vulnerability, and they're exploiting all of these reporters and they're exploiting these people in Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is using it for all these things. It is straight up freaking advertising. And if you're in charge, right, if you're in some type of offensive cyber command in the United States government, you are absolutely going to get questions from your senators and congressmen and women and people that are GS1 too manys. They're going to be like, well, if our adversaries have this level of capability, why aren't we buying it and using it, or at least developing that capability? And then how they develop it is they create a company here in the United States that's a shell company. They buy all the technology from NSO. They feed it into the shell company, and then they resell it back to the United States. I don't know if anybody cares about that type of inside baseball, but that's literally how this crap works.
Yeah, I also think I think it's funny. Like, I guess one thing to keep in mind if you're the Israeli company is that the people that are working for you will turn on you in approximately 0.2 seconds when they get black bagged and pulled into the wrong room. The other thing is that, like, it is so funny to me. Like, it's so different with cyber weapons to talk about like proliferation or that kind of thing. Like, I guess it's actually, is it like, okay, so Russia had all these tanks, right? And then they got sold to different countries and, big bad. But like, I guess for cyber weapons, do they have more control? Like, I don't know. I wonder, like, because you can't stop a tank from being driven like by anyone who happens to be inside that tank. But
all these cyber weapons are doing callbacks to the main company,
right? So it's like they actually can be like, you're coming from Saudi Arabia, so no. Like, it's just interesting. Like,
they can, but they don't, right? Because they want that to come from Saudi Arabia, and they can totally ride that connection back and spy on the people that are using your software to spy on people.
But they have the politicians believing that they aren't doing that.
Well, I am sure that there's behind closed door conversations with the politicians that are telling them to STFU and here's some crayons, color.
Yeah.
So, and once
It's
again,
just a funny, yeah.
I hope they are.
It's like, so what's your market strategy for marketing this? Closed room, U.S.
tons
government.
of bad press in America.
Oh man.
So it ends up on the Drudge Report, Huffington Post, Fox News, CNN, just to make sure that all the generals that are making purchasing decisions are seeing your product,
Yes,
right?
and you got to make sure, like, your market valuation is not how much your company's worth, but how many pending lawsuits there are. So it's like,
Yes,
how many
absolutely.
pending lawsuits you got? Oh, you got 50 pending lawsuits. Oh, you got Apple suing you. We want this product.
Yes, yeah, we want some of that.
Didn't
Like every time these news stories are on CNN or Fox News, like a major one, it's like infosec Cialis commercials. They're gonna buy your product. It's just like, oh yeah, I'm gonna need some of that.
You want to do one more?
If we got time, you pick one.
Well, I was looking at the Steve Aoki one because, why not? It's a crypto scam, and I'm a sucker for a crypto scam. But I will say a lot of the this is a great example. People are still using Twitter to do things. Like, they're still using Twitter as an attributable source, I guess, which is just, I don't know. It's crazy. So basically what happened was, someone compromised Steve Aoki's Twitter. Apparently he's a musician, throws cakes at people. And he, tweeted out a fake link to his new NFT project. But turns out his new NFT project is just an exploit.
So the scam is compromising identities, right? And people trusting that it came from the right person because they're just one login away. Yeah.
It's just really funny. In the crypto space, they've solved this. Like, they've solved, like, identity attribution. They have, like, the blockchain. They have, like...
but you got to put in the work to do the validation, right?
Well, yes, that's correct. And that's the thing that with NFTs people don't want to do because they want to mint it. They want to be first to do it. But
isn't this just like the great Abraham Lincoln quote about the internet? You don't trust anything on the internet.
Yeah, I read that on the internet.
Yes.
But he tweeted it.
I thought you were going with the great Abraham Lincoln quote, "Theater sucks."
I don't know. That was a really short one. That was boring.
I think it's fine. It's a margins game, right? If somebody's followed by 46 million people or whatever, and you can get a hold of their account, you totally know that there's going to be a percentage of people that are dumb, but there's also going to be a smaller percentage of people that are really, really dumb, and you can totally take advantage. It's P.T. Barnum's born every minute thing.
But okay, so the thing that really gets me about this one is we've seen this before with, like, rich, high-profile accounts tweeting out links to crypto scams, and they've been way less successful than this. So I guess I'm just going to say the NFT crowd, they might be the most gullible crowd on the face of the planet.
Well, that's because the NFT crowd, right, the way that they make money is they have to grab it up as fast as possible.
Right.
And then they have to offload it, and being the first to get the exclusive whatever, right? So they literally do it as fast as possible and don't think, could this be a scam? They're like, I need this, and then...
Okay, so now we just need to discover the cybersecurity application.
By people that are talking about, here's how before everything went to hell in crypto, they were like, here's how we're going to make money in NFT, exactly like you were talking about, like a pump and dump scheme. And I'm like, yeah, I could do that, but it's evil and it sounds really boring. Like there's funner ways to make money than doing.
Yeah. That's true.
All right. All right. Let's go back to the Cricket Finger. Good show. Thank you so much for joining me, Mike and Corey and Wade and Ralph. Really appreciate it. And we will see you next week. Oh, I've got a Pay What You Can class almost coming up constantly. But if you like computer security stuff and you want to hang out, or more importantly, if you know someone that wants to get into computer security, check out Antisyphon Security Training, our website, and go to our Pay What You Can options because we have lots of cool stuff there. Thank you so much, Ryan. Take us out.